But anyway, so I volunteered for CCA for quite some time, growing up in Ellicott City. So I'm a native Marylander. I grew up in a small family business pretty much as soon as I could walk, and following around with my dad, who was a home builder in a business he created in 1977. So I was lucky to work with a family, work with my father, who is my hunting and fishing buddy. In fact, he was with me to help me buy that fly rod at Joe's shop. And still is today. So I come to CCA as a volunteer. I came to CCA as a volunteer, like I said, really through a connection with saltwater fly fishing and my interest in growing skills there. But ultimately found a home in the policy side of what CCA does. A lot of folks think politics is a dirty word, but I think it only is if you really choose to make it that way. And we all know that there's a challenge in managing things that we have to share, a public resource, something that's really difficult to count and assess. And so it really is a public process that's we're all welcome to participate in, and many choose not to. For some reason, this process, these shaping policy and dealing with fisheries is something I can manage, kind of the workload of and the stress and the challenge. I really appreciate the challenge. I enjoy the dialogue and the debate. And it makes me, I'm really honored to be in a position to work on behalf of recreational anglers, because I know so many are frustrated by these things and really want fishing to be their recreational outlet, their escape from everyday life. So anyway, for better or for worse, I hung around long enough, and in 2016 applied to become the executive director in the first part of February of 2017. So I've been at the helm for a little more than 4 years. And in the fisheries management sphere, I've been on the Sport Fisheries Advisory Commission since 2010, maybe 2009. But either way, that was really my first thrust into being heavily engaged with Maryland DNR related to all these issues. And then ultimately, just through volunteering, continued to get more involved. Was appointed to a Menhaden advisory panel at the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. And also appointed to a striped bass advisory panel some time ago, and have served on those 3 advisory roles, the Sport Fish Advisory Commission and then the 2 APs for quite some time now, all on behalf of CCA, and I'm working with our membership and leadership to try and do what's right by this resource. So ultimately, here we are with striped bass. It was a good day, I think, for the fish. The Amendment 7 process, like I said, has been open for public comment. We had really overwhelming and positive support for a lot of key components, conservation measures that I personally supported and CCA supports. The first of which I can kind of show some information here shortly, and maybe I'll pause and answer some questions. But ultimately, the Amendment 7 was broken into 9 different categories. Those categories are different components of the fishery, and that the board through a work group process decided to put together and say, okay, what are the real pieces of the puzzle here we want to work on? And we have a framework to work from. There's something called a fisheries management plan. I don't know if I can share my screen. I think I am trying to get there. Can you all see my screen now? So, yeah, especially in these times as we still kind of wait for life to get back together, if you find yourself with some free time and are interested in reading technical documents, I'm going to point you to a lot of different reading. But ultimately, CCA put together this Angler's Guide, which is, I think, the best place for you all to go if you haven't seen it yet, CCA-MD.org. And the short link for CCA websites, or most of our pages, what I try and do is it'd be CCA-MD.org, our standard website, and then /striped bass, /yellow perch, /oysters, to try and get you to those species specific categories in our site. I am the only employee in CCA in Maryland. We do have great support from our national office, but little things like web organization and whatnot do slip through the cracks. But we're also pleased to have a local contractor help manage our website. But ultimately, you can find a lot of information, and hopefully it tells a bit of the story of how we got to where we are as far as our positions on things. But ultimately, Amendment 7, which is what we discussed today, I'll go through some of the key topics. Fishery goals and objectives is something that was reviewed, and it's really just kind of, it's words in many ways, but they are an important part of saying, what is the fishery going to look like? And those specifics, I'll again point to you where you can review them, but they're changing. But ultimately today with the fisheries and goals and objectives, we said that the ones that we had before are good. I don't have them listed here. I apologize for that. But ultimately, some of these goals and objectives are related to things like managing for abundance, a term that we use quite often and a lot of anglers use. It makes sense to us that we want abundant resources because it makes our time on the water more successful, more enjoyable. But from a management or a technical framework, that's kind of difficult to nail down something that is so subjective. And so that still remains as a goal, abundance. And there is one way to define it a bit, and that is maintaining a broad age structure. So the idea being that you have lots of different ages on the spawning grounds. They all have different spawning strategies, different spawning, or not strategies, but kind of capabilities. You know, the biggest of the females, the oldest, we believe, and studies show, have the most likelihood of producing vital offspring. But what also happens if you have young fish, old fish mixing together, you get that genetic mixing, but you also get a drawn out spawn, because as we know, Maryland is awful bipolar in the spring when it comes to weather, and that is a key component, a completely uncontrollable component of what happens with each and every spawn of striped bass. Water quality is of the utmost importance. Temperature, flows, turbidity, all the great things that Tom Parham does at the Department of Natural Resources and monitors through his work. I see there, it is Tom I see there, isn't it? There he is. Okay, I was making sure. That kind of stuff is so important. And I think today we actually talked about, when it comes to spawning success, we talked about, not specifically, but we talked about the value in exploring some different things we can consider to help us forecast the outcome of a spawn each year. And data like the stuff that Tom's team collects at DNR is key in that. So there was, this week at ASMFC, there was also conversation from leadership from NOAA expressing the details of the new president's focus on climate change and various initiatives they'll be making there. And I think that hopefully can bring some more federal resources to bear to fill some of the questions in science and manage the kind of Chesapeake Bay wide watershed and all the things as a whole, because of course they relate directly back to the success of our fisheries. But ultimately the fishery goals and objectives ultimately stayed intact, and that's a good thing. We will have an opportunity to amend things again. This was our first chance to talk through all these details. Biological reference points was a big deal. Basically, and I'll show you on the front page of striped bass here, and I'll put a bunch of the links and stuff in the chat. But basically, here's what biological reference points are. It's these lines. It's the kind of the guardrails that managers use. It's the solid line that's horizontal is the biomass target, or the female SSB, female spawning stock biomass target. And then the female SSB threshold, or female spawning stock biomass threshold, which is a 7-year-old or greater female. Females recruit into spawning age, meaning they become able to spawn in a variable way. So some younger in their life cycle can spawn, some later. The stock assessment uses an assumption about those ratios of when the fish are available to spawn to help drive the estimates of what is SSB versus what is not SSB. But ultimately, this is a common fisheries. Well, the striped bass model is a little uncommon, but this is a common concept that you really track the spawning potential of the stock to project how you use it moving forward. But ultimately, these are guardrails. We want to be at the black line. We don't want to be below the dotted line. And so we've obviously fallen below it. One thing we show in our angler's guide that's important to note with regard to this reference points conversation, there it is. So I'll zoom in on that. And you don't have to really necessarily see the detail. It's the trend that I'm showing you here. In the previous stock assessment, this yellowish line, mustard kind of colored line, was our assumption of what the biomass did. The dotted line is the threshold. The dashed line is the target. And so over time, we declared the fishery rebuilt in 1995. 1995 was the threshold we selected. So we basically said, all right, what's going on out there now, at least spawning stock wise, we want this to be like, we don't want to go below this. And if we go up above it, that's great. And so at the time they said, okay, let's set the dash line here 25% higher than where we are. This was an empirical choice. This was, it made sense based on all the information around us, but it wasn't directly stated in some sort of mathematical model or fisheries theory that we should do it this way. But ultimately, we thought that was good. And so if you look from this point right here, we were a little bit flat right at first, and all of a sudden we started climbing the mountain. Man, these were the good days. Really good days. Early 2000s, mid 2000s, there were definitely red flags being waved by folks. That's some of what really attracted me to CCA. But we went down below the target, and all during this time, everybody was saying, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. They don't recruit very well year after year, but they will. It's okay. We've got enough females out there to make a lot of striped bass babies, and it'll be great. That was the tone all along here. Then there was even some conversation around, oh, well, the model actually artificially kind of tails off to the negative at the end, just because of data and some technical answer, right? Yeah, that made sense. It was mathematically correct, but what the hell does that have to do with fish? Reality is we did not see the canary in the coal mine as a whole, coast-wide. This is not CCA. We've been waving the flag for longer than I can imagine. But ultimately, we were moving in that direction, and managers didn't take action until this threshold was hit. Well, there was the most recent assessment is this now black line. This was wildly different because it was based on a new assumption about recreational catch data. And that relates to what we catch and the effort put into catching it. And that's a program called MRIP, M-R-I-P. It is a federal statistical model that is built to survey anglers and understand our catch and effort coast-wide year long. So statistically it's sound and it's built to do it that way, coast-wide year long. There was a recalibration as we realized that technology changes and the way anglers get information changes. And they realized that their survey methodology was off and that they were calling household telephones. It used to be a household telephone survey. We all remember a time, stretch that phone off the wall with the cord, answer it, and yeah, you'd get somebody, right? And they really weren't just calling people at fish, they're calling everybody. And that was considered in the model. But ultimately they decided, look, we're not getting precise enough information out of this system. We want to try something different. They started mailing survey questionnaires to people. And once they did that, they started getting a much different picture of what's going on. And they ran things in parallel for a while. And ultimately, right before the 2018 benchmark stock assessment, which is a big stock assessment that I'll point to in a second, a couple hundred pages. Right before that assessment, they decided to use the new recalibrated data. What that did was it said, okay, there are more anglers out there fishing than we thought, and they're encountering more fish. So they're having more effort, but they're actually catching plenty of fish. So what we assume is that if there's that many out there, meaning that so many people can interact with them, then the overall picture of the population must be larger. And that's kind of how we get at this placing a number on things. And that's why over time, through different stock assessments and different assumptions, and all of which is peer reviewed, this is basically we grow our perspective. And all of this wouldn't matter much if the numbers here didn't correlate to a direct quota in a commercial fishery and the estimates of mortality in a recreational fishery. And so when all this happened over the last 2 years, if you read our newsletters and stuff, I hope it's made some sense. But ultimately, we had this grand collision of, uh-oh, we're sharing something, and our assumption of ratio or balance of what we share is way off. Also, that red flag that we've been waving for quite some time, saying, hey, this decline is not acceptable. We're seeing it on the water, and you guys react too late. That proved to be true right here. No surprise to striped bass anglers. And finally, the science shows it. So back to today, and I'm going to break right after this little statement. Back to today, we were talking about biological reference points, those two lines. And for many, many years, some states, Maryland in particular, has said, well, if we're not reaching the goal, the higher point, then we need to reset it and try a different goal, which in code word means let's kill more fish. Let's make it easier on ourselves. Let's change the rules. And yeah, that's a little cynical, but no wonder. So ultimately today I was proud to make my first motion as a commissioner to remove consideration of changing this from the table. So it's gone. It was the number one priority of the public comment, CCA, many recreational angling partners to say, no, you're not making it easy on yourself. It's time to do what's right by the resource and turn this thing around. And hey, if we're not lucky, it's going to take a moratorium. No question. We need these fish to recruit, and it's not happening. 5 years of subpar recruitment. 2015 was the last good year class. 2015 fish are now 26, 27 inches long. They're heading to the ocean and going to live the rest of their life out there. They're out of our hands at this point. And so we have to protect these fish. And so ultimately I was proud to make this motion to get rid of this. And what this does is just simply keep the current goal in mind in place. We're going to keep that high, lofty goal, even if it's not achievable, we're going to try. Of course, there are a lot of people talking about, oh, striped bass eat all the river herring and striped bass eat all the shad, and they're putting an impact on blue crabs. Well, yeah, that's how it works. Predator and prey relationships are key, and we got to stop screwing it all up. But anyway, so that was a big win today. A commissioner from Maine, who was a former fisheries manager at ASMFC, seconded the motion. We had robust debate. One of the most highly respected technical folks from Rhode Island opposed it, pushed back a little bit, and I thought maybe he would win the day, but I was really proud to advance this because it is a big deal. It's complicated, but we basically are going to set our sights back where they belong and try and return this fishery if all things go well. So let me stop right there. I can talk all night. Are there any questions or anything I missed and you'd like me to clarify on what I've talked about so far?
Yeah, what is recruitment?
Sure. So I also get the benefit of helping teach a recreational or a fisheries education course each year. So I get a refresher. So not only do I get to do it every day, but I get better at it because I learn from really good people. And bottom line is there's so much information on the ASMFC website, Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, ASMFC. So I would recommend all of you go to this page, which I'm showing you right now. Go to the about us, or here you go, Management 101. This will help you read and reread and reread some of these terms so they soak in a bit. I recommend this be the number one go-to for almost too much information, but Management 101 is key. So recruitment is what you see. It should be in this chart here. Oh, that's the wrong one. Darn it, they moved it. All it is it's a, let me see if this has a chart. What we do is Maryland DNR for many, many years now has gone out and done an analysis of what's called the young of year. You'll see it referred to as YOY. Okay, I can kind of show it right here. So you'll have it YOY, young of year. And what that is a 60-some year series of sane net surveys that Maryland DNR, Virginia, and others have been doing to basically understand year after year after year, comparing one to another, because that's what an index is. They basically go out and they sane certain areas. They use a standard methodology, a standard count. They record all the different variables, and they know through a scientific process that they're collecting this data, in a robust way. And I've actually been able to go do it. So they go out and wade, sweep the same net, count, measure, sometimes take scale samples from fish. They may do special sampling depending on other studies going on, but they ultimately try and guess, or they observe how many juvenile striped bass they find. And so when you're a striped bass, you got to make it a year to turn one, right? So you're age 0 for the first year. Recruiting in the sense of a stock assessment means that fish has made it into the first year. And now it's kind of measurable as entering the stock. Recruitment also can be recruitment to a certain status. So quite often in striped bass, we will say, I probably said already, recruiting into the spawning stock.
Right.
That's when you become sexually mature, and that happens on a kind of a scale depending on age. So it's in many ways. And on the juvenile abundant surveys, the JAI or YOY, That's what these X's are here. There's not much scale there. It's not the right thing to show you, but it might even be in our angler's guide. It's very commonly there as bars, and ultimately, gosh, I wish I had it for you. I think I can find it. Almost certain I can. Yeah, there it is. Okay, stock assessment. This is the stock assessment. This is 719 pages. This is a really robust scientific document. I'm probably not going to find this, but there's a lot of information in the back, the tables and such. Believe it or not, there's not a lot of text. I'm going to try and scroll through, and maybe one of these tables will catch my eye. And ultimately, for me, I'm a visual guy. I like the charts. I like the graphs. I have an engineering background in college, but the trends are what's key to look at. And ultimately, we've been on this lower trend of recruitment and success in spawning in the Chesapeake. 2018 was wildly crazy, of course, because of all the fresh water and the mud and the flows. And we've also seen correlation with poor recruitment of other species that are also caught up in this survey, like menhaden. There's been a decade-plus long lull in menhaden recruitment or reproduction. They don't spawn in the bay. Their larvae drift in from the ocean. So they have a completely opposite spawning strategy from striped bass, but we're just not observing them in the watershed. That leads to the concern about omega and forage availability and all those kinds of things we're fighting for too. But ultimately, recruitment's huge, and it's there's actually segments of this stock assessment that I will get to here. Let's think about there's 4 things that we can think about that a fish does. It's born, it dies, it swims into an area, and it swims out of an area. And that's kind of it for fisheries management. What we control is their death. Everything else, we try and understand it. And that way we can manage fishing mortality or the death of fish. But just regardless of what we do as humans, the most striped bass there will ever be in a year class is the moment they're born. They will die until the last one out of that cohort or that birth is gone. And so we have to recognize that. And to me, there's a table in here where you can actually see, I think it's called a waterfall table. This is indices of relative abundance. So this actually kind of shows it, but it shows you this exponential decline in the data. And you can kind of watch it year by year by year. So you can tell when there's a strong year class based on this number here and how they relate to each other. So really strong recruitment in 95, in 96, 97, if I'm reading this correctly. And what ends up happening is it kind of swoops down through as these fish age out. But there's a lot of information in this stock assessment that for folks that are really interested in the technical pieces of it can kind of understand it. Because ultimately, I've always said to people, we can be, as advocates, there's absolutely nothing wrong with filling in your name on a form letter. Because and you trust that source that gave you that information, and you're clicking through to provide input. That was specifically stated by a commissioner today, because often we discount form letters, especially given all the technology that exists. I know for a fact that Maryland DNR ignores a lot of the public comment we provide, but it's still my job to rally for it, promote it, be optimistic about our role in lending our voice to these things. So bottom line is, I think being a well-informed advocate is going to do us all, that makes us all more effective. And these stock assessments are a great way to kind of get more informed. And frankly, I would love to put together a more thorough kind of presentation for you all, because I'm hoping this is making sense. And I again apologize, it's kind of just me talking to the camera. But here you go. There's some of the. I'll stop talking and just listen if anybody has a question.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah.
I saw on an online forum that a lot of recreational fishers were complaining about invasive species having an impact on especially juvenile bass.
Yeah.
Blue cats and snakeheads, are they really having any kind of effect?
So I think blue cats stand to cause more trouble than a snakehead would on striped bass. I think it's not so much that fish is the problem, it's that predator in town in an already stressed system, I think. And blue cats, the can't remember where it was published, but there was just a study, and I can't remember the exact term, but ultimately they do DNA analysis of stomach contents, because I'm not sure about all predators, but I can tell you, or predator species of fish, but I can tell you that just from paying attention closely the last couple of years, snakeheads and blue cats absolutely process their food very quickly. So a traditional review of what's in their gut contents is difficult and laborious. And frankly, we don't have an invasive species program in Maryland. Already stretched thin staff are stretching themselves more thin to truly measure these things. But science is changing quickly. But the bottom line is I just saw a report from related to catfish, and we know that blue cats, we know that they'll feed on shellfish, freshwater mussels, and then they'll become piscivores. They'll come up off the surface and pursue finfish. They're going to change throughout their life cycle, so there's that complexity. They're in different systems, can affect things in different ways. And unfortunately, all we can do is look back and go, okay, we think that this is what they did, and then hopefully plan accordingly moving forward. And I think it's hard to do that with blue cats because ultimately we're talking about striped bass. We control how many we kill. Remember the other pieces of the puzzle, we just have to observe, and it's really tough. And the only tool we have is to err on the side of caution, which is really tough for fisheries managers. And they're bosses. It's not to discount whether they care or not. I mean, there's politics and everything for a reason, and we all have an opportunity to try and have our voice heard. But ultimately, it's difficult to nail that down. Snakeheads, no question, they eat, and there's lots of pieces of the puzzle coming together. And CCA right now has our invasive species count, which is a citizen science effort. It's through iAngler. We request that you provide a picture of the catch, maybe some stomach contents, a weight if you can, and if you have to give a location of where it is, and we just provide that DNR or that data to DNR and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So we're doing that, and there's a lot of debate around invasive species, and I think that's a healthy debate if we address it right. There's a lot of things changing in our ecosystem, and this isn't the first non-native introduction to the Chesapeake Bay. There's plenty of them. Many of them we love to catch, black bass. So time will tell, and I'm not going to sit here and say I have an answer. I mean, I give long answers because there's a bigger story to all these pieces of the puzzle. And the reality is I just encourage folks to kind of keep an open mind with these things and recognize that none of us really know. Snakeheads and blue cats are here to stay. There's no question. Whether people want to have a robust commercial fishery, people want to have game fish and no commercial fishery, it's going to take data, it's going to take time, it's going to take analysis, it's going to take dialogue. So we're moving in that direction at some pace. I just don't know what pace yet.
Hey, Dave, I have a question. One of the revelations to me in studying this topic has been the catch and release mortality. Mm-hmm. And when I heard it was 9%, I was shocked. I had no idea. Can you talk more about that and
yes,
what's behind those numbers and what they really mean?
Yes, absolutely. So I pulled up the section of our angler's guide because we briefly touch on this, and I want you all to see the releasesense.org website that CCA has put together. It's largely focused on some Gulf species because that's most of where their research is being done for the Hart Research Institute, which is part of Texas A&M in Corpus Christi, Texas. So, but you can relate one condition, fatal condition, to another with fish. Kind of use your logic pretty easily. It's not that complicated unless you make it complicated. They breathe, when they're in the water. they don't breathe in the air, except for that snakehead. But ultimately, there's all these things, and I can't remember the technical term, but there's all these things that can affect these fish when we handle them as anglers. And we need to understand that. We need to be responsible. And it's almost impossible to ever think that we can count and quantify and truly understand what our real impact is. Millions of anglers up and down the coast that pursue striped bass in variable conditions. I think a previous stock assessment on striped bass actually stated that I want to say it was definitely more than 75%. It may have been like 90% of the stock is handled at some point throughout the year. It was an amazing number. I think it was 75. And this was some years ago. But that's what estimates showed when you showed how many people are out there, how many fish are out there. And so ultimately, the assumption of 9% is based on year-long coastwide averages. estimated assumptions about averages. There's 2 studies. They're not recent, and they need to. We have a lot to learn on this topic, but ultimately, for now, management is using 9%. So, if you catch 100 fish, they assume 9 of them died. When you get surveyed, you tell the person asking the questions how many fish you caught, how many fish you released, how long you were fishing. All that goes into the MRIP model. So we kind of have this way of looking at things of catch and effort, and based on the number of surveys done, the answers are during a certain time period, it extrapolates into an assumption of how much catch and effort happened in that period. That gets, we stretch that out over the whole year. So ultimately, that whole year perspective, we take that and go, all right, how many fish were live released by recreational anglers? Multiply that by 9%, and that gives you your number of dead fish. That is an exercise on paper, and only on paper. We don't know the reality. So what CCA's done, and frankly why this release sense program exists, is partly to defend the reality that catch and release is a good thing. Catch and release can be the wrong thing for certain times, and the devil's in the details. And so we want to educate folks, and circle hooks were enacted to limit this catch and release mortality during periods of time that we know they exist above average, like the summertime, and using bait, because deep hooking is really the driver of mortality here. As far as physical injury, oxygen or lack thereof, as well as other stressors, directly relate to whether this fish can survive post-release as well. So the variables are endless. The debate is endless on how we capture this. And the reality is the data that would be the way of, it would nearly be impossible to process the data necessary to do a really firm analysis of catch and release mortality. So what I advocate for and did today is to continue to invest in understanding of where we think is the worst. The dead floating fish saga of the Chesapeake Bay. Tom's work, that DO squeeze. We know all about that. So what the hell? Let's avoid it. You got nets in the water where bad water is going to come in and kill those pound net fish. Get those nets out of the water. Close that down for a little bit. Let's do something else. I mean, that's really what we're asking ourselves when we talk about this topic. And it's not just recreational. The stock assessment uses the 9% for us. There's other general assumptions about commercial mortality and discards or bycatch. But we really don't have a strong understanding of that. And DNR's typical answer is, oh, we don't have the resources. So the issue as a whole is big. But I always tell people you can simplify it, believe it or not. Really, here you go. If you put a fish in the cooler, it's 100% dead. If you let it go, management says there's not a 91% chance you might catch it again. It's alive. So it's that simple. It's either 100% dead or 91% alive. There's your personal choice. So, we've got a lot to learn. I always urge people to use respectful dialogue to educate folks, meet them where they are. Don't try and drag them over to where you are, because you don't even understand what they're thinking, what they know, what they don't know. We're going to see a lot. You're going to see a lot of work from CCA in Spanish, and working with community leaders in newer immigrant populations to help them understand the nuances of these rules and why in Maryland. We're really fortunate to be able to do some of that work, because it's a learning experience here, and we have to do a better job of taking care of these fish. And everybody's got to be on board because everybody's fishing for them. Another long answer, but that's what I'm good at.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I got a question, Dave. The striped bass regulations in the Chesapeake are date based. On a certain date, the spawn is occurring in the whole bay and all the tributaries are closed, and then it's this section of the Susquehanna Flats is open, but that river is closed and all this. But it's all date based. And there's always speculation every year, how close did they get the dates to the actual arrival of the fish in physical reality, which has always made me wonder, would it be better to do it on a physical measurement as opposed to a calendar measurement, like the temperature in the water, on April 15th is now whatever it is, 45 degrees, and we're going to close this section and whatever. I'm curious as to if fishery managers would view that as a more accurate way to do it. I think politically it could never work because charter boat captains need to schedule their clients and all that sort of stuff. But from a protecting the fish standpoint, is there any knowledge as to whether that would give a significant improvement to things?
Yeah, so I was trying to find something to visualize some of this for you, but I couldn't find what I was looking for. But ultimately, if we're talking about, it kind of goes back to the logic of the fisheries management plan in some ways, where you have to kind of frame the discussion in a specific way to answer it properly, because this fishery is so broad and diverse. But if thinking about Maryland, I'll run down some things and kind of even play king for a day on what I would do if I was in charge. So if you're thinking about the beginning of the year, I'm gonna talk about Chesapeake Bay wide, actually, because I think it'll help you guys understand the big picture, at least bay wide. So these fish we have these resident fish here, they're hanging around, mostly males in the wintertime. There's been evidence that males are going to stick around longer in their life. Females are leaving earlier. These seasonally, here you go, they're triggered to come back and spawn. Well, before that, they were hanging out in the ocean, sometimes outside the 3 mile line, sometimes inside, sometimes up to New Jersey, sometimes down to, heck, they were catching them in South Carolina this year. They were catching them in Oregon Inlet. They were catching them again in North Carolina's coast in the surf, something we haven't seen since the 90s. I mean, remember albies and stripers, so these fish are hanging out there and we're trying to understand it. There's a federal program to tag them out in the EEZ where we can't go. And so there's a lot of trying to understand what these fish are doing. And that way you can make a judgment call. You can set up your trade-offs, have your conversation that you've mentioned here. That's where you have the rubber hits the road, right? Setting the regs. So for a long time, things have changed. And obviously, right now there's an anchored gillnet fishery in Virginia that can harvest up to about just shy of 1 million pounds of fish using a 7-inch mesh, and they do it in the wintertime. So this is immediately a mistake. We're catching fish, we're targeting them on their way to spawn. In Maryland, up until last year, we had the ability to fish the Susquehanna Flats, the main stem of the bay, other tidal portions until a certain date. March 1st, things changed. The rivers were locked down. And then the flats had, of course, their regulation based on temperature and based on condition. There was also a date certain, so it was kind of if then, based on that same theory you're talking about. Rather than a hard, fast date, do it based on a certain condition, based on our knowledge of these fish and when we should and should not be impacting them. So the flats and all that April catch and release fishing was actually supported by sound science. It was supported by a study that recreational anglers did in partnership with Maryland DNR. So we could understand and measure our catch and release mortality, the impact on these fish by messing with them in this area that was permitted. And we largely found out that very few of these fish were negatively impacted. We believe that almost none that are shallow hooked and released quickly would ever die from that activity. These questions about fallback or the inability to spawn after being handled are not answered scientifically. There's some Maryland DNR folks that are looking into some of this right now, and I'm not sure if that's in an official capacity or just kind of on their free time. But ultimately, trying to understand that, like what happens if we pick up a big not pregnant, but egg-laden female, release her, then what's going to happen to that fish? So we have to piece all that together to help make these judgment calls. And unfortunately, DNR used a blunt tool in changing our regulations to today and confused a lot of people and demonized this idea that if you release a fish, you're a bad person, or made that a bad activity, because they chose to ignore the details, and the relatively simple details. Hot water, using bait, not a condition for catching and releasing multiple fish. Catch your limit and get the hell off of them. Go home. Go catch perch. And I don't know why that's so damn hard to communicate to the public. I actually told them personally, standing in a legislative session in 2018, I believe, may have been 2019. I said, you all need a red, yellow, green advisory system that you just literally fly it from the damn TAWS building, fly it from the Bay Bridge to tell people when they should and shouldn't be doing certain activities. We have that. I think, it's the one little piece of education DNR has really done well on this topic. And I'm, of course, a cynic, but after you give them so much good advice over the years, you just get to the point where you go, okay, can't get out of your own way sometimes. So ultimately, I think there's a lot of concerns around charter's ability to book trips, like you mentioned. I think there's a solution around it. And whether we like it or not, if we keep doing things that we can't reliably measure that are impacting these fish, we're back into a moratorium and all the businesses are closed. All the boats are on dry. So, I think there's a lot of minds being opened to flexibility and changing how we do things in Maryland. I'll go to that king for a day statement now, and then I'll stop. I would end the trophy season a decade ago, or at least move it back to May 1st, where it was originally intended. It was never meant to go earlier. It was moved earlier into April as a negotiation when the flats were opened. Well, if they can do it, then we should too. It was about managing people, not actually thinking about managing fish. It was a mistake. There's a big boat charter versus guide. There's a gray area between big boat charters and commercial. We have a diverse fishery that overlaps in a lot of ways. That's okay. It is what it is, but you got to call a spade a spade. So I would close the trophy season and I would make sure that these fish from a date certain based on some science are left the hell alone until they get to where they need to go. That doesn't mean we can't have reasonable recreational catch and release based fisheries to derive economic benefit to catch the fish of a lifetime. Just like the tarpon fishery, if it's above a certain size, you can't pull it out of the water. Well, it's based on science and logic, right? But we have a robust tarpon fishery and we've limited release mortality, right? We can do it if we value that fish. We don't value the striped bass. We sell them for pennies on a dollar if you compare commercial versus recreational value. They're laden with toxins and we feed them to people in Philly and New York. I mean, it's the most ridiculous economic use of a resource I've ever seen in my entire life. And it's not falling on one person's shoulders. And I don't have all the answers. I mean, I'm bold today. We had a good meeting, but it's the truth. I mean, we can do better. COVID actually put quite a dent in commercial harvest, thankfully, because DNR was not going to do it. DNR let the commercial fishery get by without reducing their catch. Regardless of all these different things we know, DNR doesn't take action unless the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission requires them to do it. They're not proactive. They're not respecting the resource that we, as Marylanders, better protect better than anybody because they all spawn here. They all live here for the first 6 years of their life. So there's a lot to be done. There's a big question of trade-offs and balance related to how we want to persecute the recreational fishery moving forward. That's going to be a difficult enough conversation. The commercial fishery is going to have to pay the piper eventually, no matter what happens. They're too efficient. They're catching too many fish, in my opinion, based on the current stock. DNR did not reduce their catch. The total quota is 1.44 million fish. And so you can't look at that downward decline of striped bass and just ignore a large portion of catch, all because we talk about catch and release mortality and this new perspective of rec versus commercial I mentioned a while back. So we've got, it's going to get tougher before it gets better. And part of my actions today were basically to signal to the board, to the public, and to Maryland DNR that we mean business from I do and CCA does. We've laid back and been relatively lazy with this fishery, if you ask me, for way too long.
Dave, I'm sorry. When I was younger, the thing was you couldn't take a 15-pound rockfish May 15th. We had plenty of fish, and all that goes. Politics gets involved, and all that goes away.
Yep. It's a shame. And bottom line is, we always point to redfish as a good solution. And the basic concept of redfish was CCA in 1977 formed and said we've had enough. By 1983, we went from being the Gulf Coast Conservation Association to CCA when Florida came on board. We summarily banned commercial gill nets in nearshore tidal waters to protect speckled trout, flounder, and redfish. We then slowly but surely, various things happened to protect large spawning redfish in federal waters. And that happened all the way around the coast. It's not as simple as ban the nets, CCA is great. A lot of things happened that were hard fought. A lot of things happened that were kind of lucky. And ultimately, the various states I mentioned in the Gulf have made the decision as a state to maintain those net bans. What that did was it protected the juvenile abundance, the abundance of young fish in the estuary where we catch them as puppy drum or speckled trout, 18, 16-inch trout. It protected flounder, but it just made the policy decision that, hey, you guys aren't involved. This is a recreational fishery. Can we screw it up? Hell yeah, we have in many places. Do we have to pull back on the reins? Absolutely. They're doing it in Texas right now. They have a hatchery. They have tons of great work going on to conserve these stocks because of cold weather, because of habitat decay or decline, something that's changed drastically since that period of time you talked about, Joe. Our habitat, our potential for growing striped bass is changing. Do we know how much? No. There's the invasive species component. Could they have an impact? I think so, logically. But anyway, so the redfish, we ultimately said, all right, they grow fast, relatively speaking, to a certain point. When they get about 27, 28, they start to get into that kind of bigger red status. They're spawning stock fish, and they slow down their growth really quickly at that point. So they grow slower. So the idea here is, if you think back to what I was talking about exponential decay in a population, just one cohort, 1 year class, as they decay, they're going to die anyway. So if we put the right level of harvest on those younger fish, we can more quickly replace them into the system and have them available for harvest. They're going to die anyway, but that's not an excuse to kill them all. It's got to measure the amount of those juvenile fish in that 15 to 28 slot or 18 to 28 slot. It varies up and down the coast. But we made that decision. Target the immature fish. I think they're better meat quality. They're more abundant. They're accessible to more anglers. It's a good decision. Leave the big ones alone. Well, we have these massive roaming schools of red drum up and down the Atlantic coast, throughout the Gulf. Anglers love that. Some people want to kill them, but for now, this idea of protecting the spawning stock to give us the quicker and more available juveniles works for red drum, given all the other factors that I'm not explaining. Will the same thing happen for striped bass? I don't know. We do technically have a max size limit everywhere but Maryland. So the coastal fishery right now has a slot. We finally do have a max size limit on striped bass. We don't talk about it that way, but we do. Maryland's the only one that can kill the big ones right now. I think Virginia can later. And that's ridiculous, right? We have our cake and we eat it too here. We have for way too long. And it is frustrating that it takes managers so long, but to me, it's also has to be motivating and galvanizing to recreational anglers, especially those that look at these things differently, because charter captains, Maryland DNR thinks of them in a separate category all to themselves, but that's just convenient for the politics of the day. That's convenient for the situation we're in. As soon as things get tough, everybody wants their own little piece of the puzzle, and no, I get mine. It's selfish. So what did Maryland DNR do? They split us. This idea that they're for hire, we're private anglers, they get 2 fish, we get 1 fish. It's total BS. It flies in the face of the current state law. It uses terms like fair and equitable, which makes sense to all of us, but are hard to prove in a court of law. But the reality is, we, the private recreational angler, got thrown to the wolves. Commercial got left out of the cuts until COVID cut their catch by about 30%, thankfully. I hate to say that in the pandemic, but I think you understand my point. The pandemic conserved some fish. The ultimate reality is that charter captains are us. Without somebody like any one of us paying our way to hop on that boat, there is no business. There is no sector. They're a bus driver, and they're great. I caught my first rockfish on a charter boat. I fish on them whenever I can. I sold my boat so I can invest in fishing with a professional that knows what they're doing, right? This whole idea that it's us versus them is only to benefit the politicians and the politics. So there aren't 3 sides to the striped bass story, in my opinion. There's 2. It's rec and commercial. It needs to be more about the fish than about the sectors and the people, because we've gotten here because we ignored the fish. We managed for the people. So lots of ways to figure it out, and it's only going to take dialogue and strong leadership, and we'll get it figured out. I don't know if it's going to be this governor, next one, or the one after that, but we're going to keep working on it. No question. And the bottom line is, living here in Maryland, we at least will have opportunity to catch some juvenile fish. And I don't know what rules may come into place in the future, but just from we're pretty fortunate to be sitting here on the doorsteps of a national treasure like Chesapeake Bay, and we will have these juvenile fish here. But what's key is that we continue to pass on sportsman ethic into the future. We've always done that as a community, especially the fly fishing community, without a doubt. And again, that gives me hope to be an optimist. I mean, 10 years ago, if you would have asked me, would you be sitting at the ASMFC table? Would you be in this position? I would have said, hell no, but look at me now. And I can't do it without the support of our members and the people that are dedicated to this work and support our association. And to me, CCA has always been the right path towards advancing, these measures like I've been talking about. And again, we can't do it without our members. And guess what? We're not ignoring everything else. We try and get engaged with trash cleanups. We try and get engaged with various environmental standard environmental issues. We have a robust habitat program. We're teaching kids, how to build artificial reefs. We're doing it with them, building reef balls, putting them in the bay. I sit on the Oyster Advisory Commission. A tough place to try and shape policy, but we're involved on every front. Habitat, forage fish, the game fish, our access, DNR's communication to us, things like I was on a call last night talking about, budget priorities and how do we focus on that front? How do we engage with legislators? And I think the take home message to everybody is always, each one of you can be an important cog in the wheel or the gears here, just by nature of being a citizen of Maryland. And I'll always provide guidance to folks on how they get engaged, regardless of what they want, because I think we owe that to each other to have dialogue in these times more than any others, and try and work through this stuff honestly. And so I'm an ideal.
Dave, I have a thought just occurred to me about our Maryland standing in the ASMFC. Since we're the nursery for 80% of these fish on the coast, did the other states prevail upon Maryland to do better? Are they after us because we take so many fish before they get a chance at them?
Yeah, there's definitely that dynamic. There's always been a north versus south dynamic, and that whole redfish concept I explained, and protect or use the juveniles, protect the spawners. Not everybody agrees with that. There's happened to be a Maryland citizen that kind of made a bunch of statements about me and my opinion before he'd ever talked to me all over Facebook about this. There's a difference of opinion on what fish to use. There's definitely a north-south component. There's not a right or wrong there. I worked with northern states today to push Maryland and the Bay in a positive direction to kind of tie the hands of Maryland DNR in a certain way that was necessary. So there's a lot of give and take. It's never as simple as one might like. And every state has 3 representatives. So 2 are executive branch controlled. They are the governor's appointee, and they are the fisheries director or a proxy of them. And then the 3rd seat is the legislature. So in some ways you get balance of power at play. I'm the legislative commissioner, or the ongoing proxy for the legislature. The governor's appointee is the chairman, or is a longstanding waterman. And then you have Maryland DNR. We don't have a fisheries director, but you have Mike Louisi, who's a director of a division. Every state has a different dynamic between those 3 seats. When you participate in a meeting, or if you follow along in one, you'll notice that we do something called caucus. Today we had a Google Meet open, and we would talk over each other, and it was a technological nightmare, but we got through it. There's a lot of dialogue there. I mean, at one point I got a little hot today. That's happening within each state. So it's never as simple as Maryland's bad and everybody's focused on it, but the tide turned a bit today with me being vocal at the table, because I think I'm trying to have people realize that we do listen to the public. I was the public prior to February 1st. I get it more than ever. And I really appreciate that other commissioners do as well. No matter what, there's a really capable team around that table trying to manage a really difficult topic. Every single voice comes at it from a different angle with different drivers in what they can do, what they can't do. I'm in a very fortunate position to be a legislative appointee. Delegate Dana Stein is a great leader, and who understands environmental issues and cares, but he also recognizes that he needs to put people in these positions that are really immersed in these topics. He's a reasonable outcome kind of leader, who wants to have respectful dialogue, but he's made it very clear that the conservation of this resource and the future of striped bass is more important than short-term gains. And that's a different attitude for Maryland, being at the table since Bill Goldsboro retired from CBF. That's my opinion, at least. I'm very, very happy and not happy necessarily, but I'm privileged to be at the table for whatever period of time I'm there. And so I urge people to pay attention. If it does frustrate you, just go fishing. We've got your back. Go tie some flies, go fishing. Cicada hatch is on its way. We've got your back. But and again, I'm always available, much to the chagrin of my wife. I want you all that want to be informed to be more informed than you can imagine. Nothing drives me more nuts than not conveying things clearly to our membership. So please always take the chance to call me, text me. Heck, I'd love to fish with some of you. I can't wait till we're back in person. I've got a cabinet full of fly tying stuff, and I live right down the street from Lake Roland in Baltimore County, right on the city-county line, and I've got a little tub of cicada flies right here that are ready.
Oh.
I own a little Ginu, a classic 1976 Ginu. In fact, I think the capacity plate used to be sitting around here somewhere. I bought it, and I have a push pole, and I go up to Lake Roland, literally 500 yards from my house, and always try and push pole around and try and chase carp. So I'm so darn excited for these cicadas to hatch and mess with them. I don't have the patience that Joe Bruce has to get after the carp the way you do, but I like sight casting.
Yeah, it's coming.
Hey, Dave, in following up on what you said, trying to get the word out to members, CCA used to have a podcast. I think it was called What's on the Line or something like that. And I think you all have recently started up something like that, but it's more of a channel. You need to tune into it in real time, which never works for me.
Yeah.
Is there any chance that you all are going to take those programs and create a podcast from them so you can listen to them when we're driving over the Eastern Shore to go fishing or something like that at 5 in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely. So What's on the Line was something I started, because obviously I like to talk. And these issues are so hard to convey in writing. I know we all miss the part of our community where we sit around a tackle shop and BS and learn from each other so much. And that's kind of the spirit with which I thought of this podcast. And so the idea was that I would go around the state and sit down with anglers and have conversations and talk more about fishing, but the name is on purpose. It's what's on your line, but also what's on the line for all of us in the resource. So yeah, we do have our website /podcast is the page where you can get the audio only issue or episodes. We're doing it once a month now. It's loosely around the last Thursday of the month, but that's not going to happen this month either. It didn't happen last month, but we're streaming it to YouTube live. And then what that does is on CCA Maryland's YouTube channel, if you subscribe, it'll notify you. YouTube does work on a mobile device, but I know it's not ideal. I have 2 of the last 3 episodes on a recording device sitting right here on my desk, and it will be on our audio only platform shortly. I accidentally did not record one of them on the audio only device. So it is on YouTube, our YouTube channel, the last 3 episodes. And the remainder moving forward will be. And so it's a change of platform for sure. But if you're logged into Facebook or following on YouTube and logged into your Gmail account on there, you can actually actively chat with participants. It's the best thing we can do right now. It's a platform that just works a lot better for me and my time. We do have an intern who is starting back with us in about 3 weeks. I'm going to talk with her about some various communication strategies, and that's one of the topics. She's just finished her freshman year at St. Mary's College. So hang tight. The topics will be on there. I'm going to talk about striped bass with Sean Kimbrough and maybe some other folks at his shop in 2 weeks. I think we just set the date for May 18th. We always do them in the evening. So the evening is definitely your chance for the Q&A, but there's always an opportunity to listen afterwards. And I'm pretty sure I don't have much editing to do, so I'm going to try and prioritize that because I know podcasts are great to listen to driving down the road. There's a lot of really good ones out there. I've been fortunate enough. Last week we had the folks from Blackwater's Edge involved to have a snakehead conversation. We had a good, really actually direct snakehead conversation and just sharing opinions. You know, it wasn't some CCA position or anything like that, but we had a great conversation to promote a tournament that they're doing. It's all part of the invasives count. I want to promote anything related to snakeheads and blue cats with the invasive species count. So the podcast is part of that. I always want to include our promotional partners in the invasives count. If you don't mind, I'm actually going to switch over to, sorry, I was looking at Facebook real quick to see if I got a notification. I'm going to switch over to something on our site here and show you the invasives count real quick in case you guys haven't seen it. I see I did have a chat message. Okay. So the invasives count page is CCA-MD.org/count. So just /count. The actual URL that displays is bigger. So it opened April 1st. It runs through October 31st. What it explains is that, yes, you register for free. We use the smartphone app iAngler tournament. It shows how to do that right here. But the sponsors and promotional partner concept is spelled out on a different page, and kind of some of the concepts about what are invasive, what versus non-native, what are we targeting, et cetera, is down there. But ultimately, promotional partners is this concept that we're trying to work with local businesses. We're looking to obtain donations to then reward to our participants in submitting citizen science information. We need donations, and what Blackwater's Edge and the Wolford store did is donated 10 $25 gift cards for our participants. By entering whatever month you enter in, like if you all are not signed up and you signed up right now, your name goes into the hat in May. And then for every fish you catch and log according to our instructions, your name goes into the hat again. So what we're asking for is support for those prizes to then give them back out to the community. And sometimes we're asking the donor to fulfill them for us, just to limit our time burden. There's also, I moved them, but there's a whole bunch of, if you're a CCA member, we're giving away one of our sticker rulers. I usually have one sitting around here somewhere. It's a 48-inch sticker. You can put it on anything. It's a great ruler. We're also giving away a CCA Sims hat to anybody that's a member. Oh, here's the ruler. So we have a hard plastic one and then a sticky one as well. So they're real convenient. You can cut them down if you need to. But anyway, we do that as well for participants that are CCA members, because remember, it's free. And you're going to see a lot more on this front, and I want to share all sides of the story, just like what's on the line. We're talking about what you would hear in a tackle shop. That's what I'm going to use this event for. Like I said earlier, we've got a lot of ground to cover before anything is done with invasive species related to management. But ultimately, this is about having fun. So if folks are interested in this, you might know somebody who might be willing to donate. You don't have to
catch and
donate.
release, is it?
It's whatever you want.
Okay.
Yeah, personal. I'm a big personal choice. I'm a liberty kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
If it's the law, follow the law. Otherwise, you make your own decisions based on your own judgment.
Okay.
So catch and release of anything is perfectly fine. Obviously changes the data you can collect. If you get a length, you get a location, that's great. We're not disclosing locations. And when we say location, on iAngler, when you get your picture, you have the option to press a button that actually your GPS will tell us where you were. Or you turn that off, because you get the option, and you just press a note and say, I was in the Chop Tank River or Upper Chop Tank or something like that. We don't want your spots. I'm not here to, I don't even have any time to fish except for Lake Roland. So, it's not that's not what it's about. And DNR is really respecting that, given the public transparency of data they receive. So we're going to scrub it all, et cetera, and manage it appropriately. And frankly, this is more about creating a platform for us to share our perspectives on this fishery, maybe a product or anything like that. And when it comes down to being a promotional partner, it doesn't mean you have to donate something. We ask that you bring something to the cause, to the whole effort here. It's an umbrella. It's meant to be a big tent. It doesn't have to be 10 $25 gift cards. It doesn't have to be 10 of anything. It can be one. And I want to go out of our way to promote any partner that comes to us, and vice versa, like I said. So anyway, people go to the site and just kind of fill this out. It would notify me, and as soon as I have time, I get back to them. We also are going to include some really cool stuff from Traeger grills, and some cooking segments, talking about how we cook, fish we catch. For me, given everything that's happening with straight bass, we don't have croaker spot. We actually have a spot limit for the first time ever. All these things that are changing. We don't have bay flounder. Blue cats and snakeheads are an opportunity to have a nice fish dinner. And to me personally, I love to cook, so it's a relief. I really don't like straight bass. At this point, I don't even want to see them. Call me in a decade. I'll fight for them, but I don't want to bother them personally. Anyway, so this is a fun one, and it really came to culmination because of the support of Yamaha. They're using their corporate muscle to support little old CCA Maryland. So if you have a gray motor on the back of that boat, be proud.
Great. Dave, since you're doing a screen sharing thing, could you show us where we should look for your podcasts when you actually do post them?
Yeah. Front page. And also, so we're automatically connected through SoundCloud and the Apple podcast platform. But what I just did was I actually went straight to the podcast page. It is our website /podcast. I'll start at the homepage in a second. This is just a picture. This is actually kind of catalogs the episodes. There's one little glitch with our first episode was a 2-part podcast. I don't know why. I just chose to do it that way. It's all one conversation. I think on Apple, half of that is missing, half of episode 1. If you went to the website right here, I press play, it starts playing.
Right.
Music playing, right? So you can do it from your computer. If I go back to the homepage, and you can do this from your mobile phone too. If I go back to the homepage, I scroll down, there it is. There's a button right there.
Right. So when you add your new ones, they'll be there.
Yep, they'll show up in that catalog.
Great. Okay, gotcha.
Except for the one I dropped the ball on. Also, I'm going to do it actually before I go upstairs. I'm going to put our YouTube channel right there on the podcast page as well. It's on my list. I might as well do it. It'll happen tonight. Because that way you can watch those as well. And for folks that are, in fact, I'll just show the YouTube channel real quick. There's a quick little, let's see, click that one. Oops, wrong button. So here's what our channel looks like. And I think if, there's actually a little, I guess I can't show it to you because it's me, but ultimately here's some of our live videos. One's related to General Assembly, like here's one of the podcast ones, another podcast. So you can find them on our channel. There's always a little subscribe and a bell button that just lets you be notified when something goes live. And the way we do this is through a platform called StreamYard. So we stream live, it splits Facebook, YouTube, and then it gives people the ability to chat with us, but then it stays recorded on YouTube and it stays on our Facebook page as well, further down. And we use that. We're going to use that platform to stream chapter meetings in the future as well, even when we get back to in-person meetings. In fact, we do plan on having a snakehead specific, we're going to call it an Angler's Night Out, hopefully in June. That might be in the Baltimore area. And that's to promote a snakehead tournament that Scott Sewell and Maryland Bass Nation are putting on. It's going to raise money for stocking of largemouth in some Baltimore County rivers. So that tournament's going to happen in about August, I think out of Flying Point Park, which is actually Harford County. So that's a good example of something we're going to promote for the invasives count. So. Yeah, I showed you the homepage. Let me flag something else for you too. That's pretty interesting or pretty cool. I have a brand new page of our reef ball work. You click on that. It's not finished, but it's largely finished. It has a map, and the map is going to very soon show a lot more detail about who built reef balls with us and where the balls went, where the reefs are built, because we have a lot on the upcoming. We have a lot of upcoming efforts on that front. The activities for kids. This is something we put together during the pandemic, and these are actually to my wife's goddaughter. They were fishing at one of our kids' fishing events in Canton. Anyway. The idea was that given the pandemic, teachers, parents, everybody's looking for something to occupy kids' time. And about a year ago, we had a donor give enough money to underwrite free youth memberships. So youth membership is 17 and under, so up until your 18th birthday. If you go to Kids-Corner, well, all we do is ask the kids make a project or share their project, something about their passion for fishing. It could be printing out one of these coloring sheets. So like we made this little coloring sheet you can download. It has some facts. We asked the kid to do some artwork, snap a picture of it or upload it to us, and the kid gets a CCA membership. So they get some stickers in the mail, their membership card. There's a couple different options. We're adding snakeheads and blue cats to this. And then there's some other little things here that kids can do. We just say, hey, create your own something related to the bay. Conservation, whatever you care about in fishing. And then there's a really cool page that CCA National maintains with some really good information for kids. So, if you have any young ones in your life that you'd like to point towards some fishing things, it's our Kids Corner. And again, from our homepage, CCA-MD.org, it's right here. It's a picture. So hopefully information's easy to find there, and if not, my phone number is. Any other questions?
Dave, thanks a bunch. I know you must be exhausted.
Sorry, I was a duck hunter in a previous life, so I'm used to that.
But thank you. We really appreciate your time and everything that you're doing for CCA and ultimately for us. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. I'm privileged to be in a position to do this, and I'll keep fighting as long as my wife lets me. I had a friend one time say he came to a CCA banquet, and I joke around. I said, banquets, I'm a lot more comfortable after I've had a beer or two. Golf's the same way, maybe fly casting's the same way. But after you had too many, you just become ineffective, right? And so one night I was on a roll and I was talking about something, and my wife's friend, I go back to the table, and he's sitting there, and he's surrounded by Sweetwater beer, which is an IPA. It's kind of high alcohol content. He's got cans everywhere. I said, dude, did you start a recycling project? And he stands up and falls onto me and goes, you need to run for office. And my wife smacks him. Smacks him. She goes, Matt, shut the hell up. And we had just gotten engaged, and she turned to me and she goes, you better promise me you would never think of it. I said, honey, don't worry. Show me the document, I'll sign it. Are you kidding me? I don't know how folks do that stuff, but I'm happy to represent you all. And if you have any questions, I'm available. So I'll always do my best to answer members, non-members, and please bring some kids to the story. And
Right here.
as things open up, let's go fishing together.
Thing with the club. So yeah, I
Thank you
tried
very
to
much.
call earlier, and you were.
Great. Okay. All right. Great.